Welcome back. In 1918, the war to end all wars ground to a bloody apocalyptic close, leaving surviving families in Bukovina and the Smorzanka Valley mourning their dead and scrambling for food. In Felicienthal, my great-grandfather Michael Lang and his wife Mariana Hofmeister, along with their fellow parishioners, likely frequented the church, praying novenas for family and neighbors killed in the war. Michael's brother George still had no news about his son, also Michael, although his other son, Frank George, had recently returned to the village, having walked some 4,000 kilometers from the Gulag in Russia, where he had been in prison since early 1915. Meanwhile, on the other side of the earth, our family homesteaders in Saskatchewan were celebrating bumper crops and record prices for wheat. Modern houses replaced sod huts. And wagon trails became graveled roads where Ford cars rattled to and fro. Nearby, the population of Raymore had grown to nearly 300, boasting a fire hall, hotel, pool hall, real estate, legal and government offices, drugstore, grocery store, livery stable, and several churches. One might ask, what more could anyone want? Well, fruit trees, apparently, are what Ferdinand missed most about the old country. We all know how hard our grandfather Maximilian Lang, worked to develop his own strain of apple, the Saskatchewan apple, a Lang apple. He was very big on fruit, and there's all kinds of fruit. Behind me, the apple trees that are blooming everywhere. There are plum trees in bloom and pears in bloom. And somehow, Great-Grandpa found just what he was looking for, a farm with an orchard in a German-speaking community in faraway Maryhill, Ontario. He planted this bug in the ear of his son, Grandpa Max, promising a stone house with 14 rooms and urging him to venture east, complete the purchase, and Ferdinand would follow with Katharina. Like his father, Max longed for fresh fruit, and he jumped at the idea. I suspect his wife Theresia, my grandmother, was less enthusiastic about traveling with 6 children. But Max moved quickly, too quickly, as it turned out, selling his half-section or 320 acres to Wilhelm Hubik in November of 1919, months before the family was scheduled to depart for Ontario. Wheat was selling for $2.31 a bushel that year, an astounding $38 per bushel in today's dollars, earning Max and family $5,000 from the sale of their 1919 crop alone. With that, and the proceeds of their land sale, Max had close to $20,000, about $400,000 today after inflation, more than enough to buy the new farm next summer. But for this fall and winter, having sold the farm, the family now had nowhere to stay. Luckily for Max, this year the Sacred Heart Church in Raymore was to become a mission. Father Heinrich was moving to Quinton, leaving the rectory in Raymore unoccupied. The fact that Max had helped build both the church and the rectory possibly added some leverage to the arrangement, but whatever the details, Max and Theresia moved into the rectory for the winter, before riding the Grand Trunk Railroad to Ontario the following spring. On arrival in Kitchener, Ontario, formerly Berlin, before the war, Max bought a new Ford, and the family of 8 moved into the Commercial Hotel in nearby Maryhill, formerly New Germany. For reasons unknown, the purchase seemed to take an inordinate amount of time, and they lived in this hotel for 6 months. Take a moment and picture parenting 6 small children for that long in a hotel. My father John, the eldest child, was 10 when they arrived, and he was 57 when he returned to Maryhill for a visit in 1967. Inside, he encountered the former owner, an old man named Charlie Halter. Dad said, "You know, I lived here for 6 months in 1920. Charlie extended his hand. "You must be John," he said. true story. It seems Dad made quite an impression on him as a toddler. The farm was as advertised, 14-room stone house, apple orchard, and all, but in the end, Max decided to pass on the deal. At $500 a year in gross sales, and with land that required tiling to drain the wet fields, it was less and more than he'd bargained for. Apparently he shut that door in the nick of time as a letter arrived from Ferdinand telling him that he and Katharina would not be coming as had been planned. The Grand Trunk Railroad ceased to exist while the family was in Ontario. On Max and Theresia's return west, it had a new name, the Canadian National Railway. When they arrived in Winnipeg, the family decided to take a day trip to visit Max's cousins, my other two grandparents, Franz, who was known by now as Frank, and Agatha Lang, who had a dairy and vegetable farm in Eamesville, north of the city.
My dad, Frank Lang, he went into dairy business and renting land to make hay for...
Well, he bought some land and then rented some hayland.
And rented some hayland besides, eh?
Mm-hmm.
And so we had Holstein cattle.
Mm-hmm.
Mother would ship the milk by streetcar. The streetcar came out of the city of Winnipeg, it was like 8 miles out. Okay, and then Mom would go take the Democrat. It's like a buggy.
It's a buggy. With a Democrat was a two-seater.
With horses, though.
With horses, yeah. With one, they drove it with one horse.
And she'd load these, she'd have, let me see.
8-gallon cans.
4 8-gallon cans of milk.
Mm-hmm.
And she would hoist those up on that Democrat and take them over to the streetcar line. And that was about, let's say, a quarter of a mile away from our home. And it would be,
like a little...
taken into Winnipeg. She would also make cottage cheese. And she would sell it on Saturdays to the Jewish community in Kildonan, Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Okay, out of the outskirts of Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Kildonan
was a suburb of Winnipeg. It's
was a suburb, okay. Yeah. And there was a Jewish community there. And Mom had all kinds of customers for cottage cheese.
And butter.
And butter. And when she...
Dad tells of riding the streetcar to Eamesville, where the family got off and walked the dusty short mile to Frank's farm.
When Dad, decided that we're coming back to Saskatchewan, which was around the end of September, and we stopped in Winnipeg, we took that streetcar that Mom was talking about, out to Eamesville there, to that little station, and then we got there, and the wind was howling something fierce, in the fall of the year.
Why did you stop there?
Why we stopped there? To stop there to
visit us.
Visit the Frank Langs. Yeah, we walked over from the streetcar stop to this where the Langs were supposed to be, and they weren't. And then
the Langs were long gone to Saskatchewan. In my book, I invented an actual visit with Frank and Agatha as a device to bring the reader up to date and show the relationship between the two families. Some backstory about my mother's side of the family. When Ferdinand and his gang headed west in 1906 to claim their homesteads, his cousins Frank, Lawrence, and Joseph remained on Mountain Avenue in Winnipeg, where they were making good money building houses. Joseph contracted typhoid fever and died in 1909, leaving a widow and 2 children, Joseph and Lucy. Frank and Lawrence were taking contracts north of the city, building houses, barns for farmers, and maintenance sheds along Winnipeg's Shoal Lake water pipeline, a portion of which runs through Eamesville, where they found land for sale not far from Pipeline Road and the streetcar line. Frank and Agatha bought their small farm located east of the flat Red River floodplain in 1910, sometime before my mother was born there in July. Her sister Rose had been born in Winnipeg in 1906, and of course, her oldest brother Wenzel was born in Felicienthal in 1901. As I alluded to in an earlier episode, Wenzel's last name was listed as Rice in the ship's manifest in 1905, a brother to Agatha Rice and son of Margareta, who was traveling with them and who had recently celebrated her 70th birthday. Yes, I agree, this deserves an explanation. Agatha was born and raised in Schmorja at the western end of Felicienthal, where her parents, Stefan and Margareta Rice, had lived since they arrived in Galicia as children from Bohemia. In short, they lived down the lane from Ferdinand Lang the miller, and farther on his older brother Michael Lang and his wife Mariana Hofmeister, whose 3 youngest children were Lawrence, Frank, and Joseph. We don't know when the romance bloomed, but we do know that Frank and Agatha lived in Vienna at the same time. Frank, as a sergeant in the Emperor's army, was stationed at Schönbrunn Palace and was in charge of dressing up Emperor Franz Joseph's horses with fancy harnesses, we're told, while Agatha attended an Abitur für Mädchen, a private school where she was taught the duties of a housekeeper, sewing, cooking, and so on. What we know for sure is that Agatha returned to Felicienthal pregnant and unmarried. The young lovers learned or ignored the fact that enlisted soldiers were not permitted to marry. She stayed in Felicienthal with her brother Edmund Rice and his wife Theresia, who had just given birth to her own son Alois, and was able to also nurse Agatha's baby because Agatha, no doubt stressed to her limits, was unable to breastfeed her little boy, whom she had named Wenzel. Here's how we can know this. In this letter from Edmund Rice, written to Grandpa Frank after World War II, he reports that his son Alois and Frank's son Wenzel were milk brothers, meaning they were both nursed by Theresia in Felicienthal. When they were able to travel, Agatha, her brother Frank, and baby Wenzel moved to Bukovina, where she most likely lived with her sister Regina, but possibly with her parents. In any case, dear relatives, those of you who are older can imagine the shame visited upon Agatha and her family under these circumstances. Although the truth was obvious to anyone who could do arithmetic or who cared to ask, this story was not told in the family until 1953, when Agatha was on her deathbed. She called for her daughters, Rose, Anne, my mother, and Martha, to come to her room, where she told them her long-held secret. In time, my mother told the rest of us, because she wanted us to know the truth and to know why, later in life, Agatha had been kind to other women who found themselves in similar situations, sewing baby clothes and helping as she could. Meanwhile, back in the spring of 1905, Agatha's fortunes were soon to change, as she was to meet Franz in Winnipeg and marry him instantly. Imagine her shock when she arrived in Winnipeg expecting to be greeted by Wenzel's father when he was nowhere in sight. She learned Frank was still in New York City, where he had landed in March 1905. 25 years old in New York City, Frank was having the time of his life. According to Mom, he wanted to stay with his friends, but a letter, likely from his brother Lawrence, effectively said, "Agatha and her mother are here with your son, so you need to get to Winnipeg immediately and marry the poor woman." This is the earliest photo we have of my grandparents, Frank and Agatha, as a couple, within weeks of his arrival from New York City. I think she's thinking, "Gotcha," and he's thinking, "Nah, so this is Winnipeg." When thousands of returning World War I soldiers poured into Winnipeg's main station in 1918-19, the war they brought with them turned out to be more deadly than the one they had survived in Europe, a virus wrongly called the Spanish flu. As with recent pandemics, many people refused to believe it was real, calling it the Spanish fluke. Schools were closed, events canceled, and the treatments ranged from peroxide to turpentine to hard liquor. Masks were mandated in some areas, and anti-mask groups formed to counter the mandates. The microscopic flu virus proved more deadly than all the modern artillery, bombs, and machine guns combined. In Saskatchewan, it killed 5,000 people. Every community felt it, including Raymore and Quinton, where, among others, it killed Andrew Fraze, husband to Marie Dietrich, who later married Philip Hartle and became our neighbor on the farm. the pandemic would kill between 50 and 100 million people worldwide, 675,000 in the U.S. and 50,000 in Canada. And Grandpa Frank was almost one of them. He came down with the flu and lived, to everyone's relief. His son Wenzel, now a man of 18, ran the farm with Agatha and the hired hands while Frank recovered. Wenzel was itching to drive a Ford car. Mom tells us that Frank said, "Okay, if you make enough money selling potatoes, we will buy a Ford car."
Now, if you help us pick potatoes, we'll buy a new car. And we did buy. Dad did buy one.
A 1916 Model T with a brass radiator.
We got the car. We drove into Winnipeg. Mom and Dad, they outfitted us with sweaters and new shoes. So Dad, and my older brother Wenzel, we loaded that boxcar with our best, two of our best Holstein cows, and some hay, of course. And he went with this boxcar. You know, there was hay, so he slept up on the hay in the boxcar and watered these animals. We packed up groceries and blankets and into the Ford and left for Saskatchewan.
And when we got out to Raymer, they were there.
Meanwhile, Frank's brother Lawrence, with his wife Marie, son Bill, and daughter Helen, had already left their Eamesville farm to buy Ferdinand Lang's farm, because Ferdinand was moving to Ontario. For Frank and Lawrence, reports of returns on grain were too tempting to ignore. It's likely the families all connected at Lawrence Lang's farm, homesteaded by Ferdinand and Katharina. Frank and Agatha bought the farm across the road, and all the children attended Wallenstein School.
And we stayed, like Dad and Mom and us, family stayed with Uncle Lawrence Lang that winter. That
Until March.
Winter, because we got there in fall. And then in spring, we moved into
your house.
However, when Max and his family arrived back, there wasn't room for all of them in any one home.
I stayed with Uncle Jack and Aunt Agnes' house, and the rest of the family was staying at Uncle Bill's. We met in 1919 in Wallenstein School.
I met him when I was 9, going on 10 years old. Yeah.
What, you went to school together?
Just for a little while.
When we came back from...
Dad attended Wallenstein for just 1 year, because his father Max closed a deal to buy Wilhelm Hubig's section, 640 acres, near Sarath, 8 miles south of Max's former homestead, which is why all the children attended school there, and not in Wallenstein. In 1920, Max's son Edward was born on that land, Section 22, Township 26, and his younger brother Ferdinand, known as Fern, was born there 2 years later. Dad was a good student, and in an interesting move, the teacher gave Dad his Grade 8 certificate despite him having missed the last 2 months of school, having to work on his father's 2 farms. Unlike many of his peers and cousins, Dad wanted to go on to grade 9, so Max sent him off to Grayson, Saskatchewan, where he boarded with the nuns and completed 1 year of high school. After moving his whole clan to Ontario and back and then to Sarath, greener pastures tempted Max one more time. In 1924, Max's brother-in-law Wenzel Hofmeister and his wife Mariana decided to move to Chicago. Max bought their half-section, 320 acres, and moved the family up to Wenzel's farm, a short distance north of his former half-section, now farmed by Wilhelm Hubig's son, John. Edward recalls a particularly interesting moving day.
I was 3 years old when I moved, and I remember the day we moved, my mother was still churning butter.
On the moving day.
And they were thrashing. And actually when I came down upstairs, we had a housekeeper there for a while too, a helper there, Mitty Young. I came down, when I woke up, I heard it sounded like something was dripping.
Yeah.
And so I went down to Mom and I said, I think there's water dripping something. She said, oh, of course in German, because they were talking. She said, what will be dripping? There's nothing up there. They said, it drips, she said. So she came up to see, and the chimney was there, and she said, the chimney's on fire. That's click, 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 click. So she went down, rang there, and the people were thrashing. They came with the hay racks, and they took, on the west side, most of the buildings had cleats up to the chimney. Because the chimneys used to be because of the green wood, and now the soot inside
they
burned.
Yeah.
So they just had some salt, a bag of salt, put some salt in there, and
that was it.
That was it. So they were.
Although Max had increased his holdings to 6 quarters, 960 acres. Since 1919, the price of wheat plummeted to 71 cents and would soon plunge even lower. They kept the Sarath land for a few more years, with my father and his brothers Bill and Carl often spending days at a time down there, and from all reports, happy to be away from their parents. Dad says they ate bacon and eggs 3 times a day, one of his favorite meals. Babies kept a-comin'. Among these, Max and Theresia's baby Ferdinand, known as Fern, arriving in 1922, Ella in 1924, Marie in 1926, and her only lost infant Theresia, born and died in 1929. Frank and Agatha's baby girl Martha arrived in 1924. And Max's siblings added to their families as well. In 1925, John Lang Sr. and his wife Elizabeth Ullman added baby Martha for a total of 9 children. Bill and his wife Anna Hinger had their 5th child Regina in 1920 and Ida in 1929. Meanwhile, on my mother's side of the family, her uncle Lawrence had his 3rd child Helen, who was a sister to Louisa and brother William, known as Bill Lawrence Lang, and she was born in 1922. When the Roaring Twenties limped to a close, the roar became a whimper, as low grain prices and the 1929 stock market crash dampened any ambition to seek yet greener pastures. In the next episode, the dirty 30s droughts turn pastures brown, decimate crops, and cause many former rich investors to jump out of windows. The heady, cash-rich days turned to dust, leaving many in our family deeper in debt. But youthful optimism springs eternal as well, as the next generation began their own families in the middle of the Dust Bowl. Thanks for watching.